Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Some betrayals cut so deep they reshape your entire understanding of reality. And standing in aisle 7 of that suburban supermarket on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a cart full of mundane groceries while my world crumbled around me, I realized I'd been living inside someone else's carefully constructed lie for the past 3 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery section seemed to mock the bitter taste that had suddenly filled my mouth. My ex-wife's son and I ran into each other at the supermarket 10 years after the divorce. "Long time no see," I said. The words had come out automatically, the kind of polite greeting you offer when you're not sure if the other person even remembers you. Tyler Sullivan had grown from the awkward 14-year-old I'd known into a man of 24. But those same intelligent eyes that used to look at me with something approaching respect now held a mixture of shock and what I could only describe as horror. He looked at my current wife beside me and froze. Claire had been examining a package of organic pasta, her perfectly manicured fingers turning it over to read the ingredients with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything in our life together. She'd always been particular about details, something I'd initially found charming about her. The way she organized our spice rack alphabetically, how she folded my shirts with military precision, the methodical way she planned our social calendar months in advance. Now, watching Tyler's face drain of color as he stared at her, those same traits took on a more sinister cast. Without a word, he fled as if he'd seen the Grim Reaper. The kid practically knocked over an elderly woman in his haste to escape, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as he rounded the corner toward the exit. Claire looked up from her pasta examination, eyebrows raised in that perfectly sculpted arch that had first caught my attention at the coffee shop where we'd met. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice carrying that slight breathiness that had once made my heart race. "He seemed to know you." Before I could answer, moments later, my phone buzzed with a message from him. I pulled it out, expecting maybe an apology for the awkward encounter, but what I found instead made my blood turn to ice in my veins. "Divorce her now. Your new wife is." The message cut off there, followed immediately by another text. "Can't explain here. Meet me at Riverside Park, North Bench by the Old Oak. Come alone. Your life depends on it." Claire was still watching me, and I realized I'd been staring at my phone for what must have been 30 seconds. "Everything all right, honey?" she asked, moving closer to me, her hand touching my arm in that possessive way she had. "You look like you've seen a ghost." If only she knew how accurate that description was. I met Tyler 2 hours later, after making excuses about needing to stop by the office to pick up some files. The park was nearly empty except for a jogger on the distant trail and an old man feeding ducks by the pond. Tyler was sitting on the bench exactly where he'd said he'd be, but he looked like he'd aged 5 years in the span of our brief supermarket encounter. His hand was shaking as he lit his 3rd cigarette since I'd arrived. "You have to understand," he began without preamble, "I never thought I'd see her again. When Mom told me you'd remarried, I figured it was just some random woman. I never imagined." He took a long drag, exhaling smoke that dispersed quickly in the afternoon breeze. "Danny, the woman you married isn't who you think she is. I'd always liked Tyler. Even during the messy divorce from his mother Beth, he'd somehow managed to maintain a relationship with both of us, though it had naturally faded over the years as he went off to college and started his own life. He was a good kid, honest to a fault, which was why his next words hit me like a physical blow. Her real name isn't Claire Hoffman. It's Claire Dutton, and she was Mom's best friend 8 years ago. She's the one who orchestrated everything. The affair, the divorce, all of it. She seduced Mom's lover specifically to get information about your marriage, your weaknesses, your financial situation. The whole thing was planned from the beginning. The world seemed to tilt sideways, and I gripped the edge of the bench to steady myself. That's impossible. I met Claire 3 years ago at Murphy's Coffee House. She was reading a book about architecture, and I struck up a conversation because I just finished designing the new library downtown. It was completely random. Tyler's laugh was bitter and humorless. Nothing about Claire Dutton is random, Danny. She knew you'd be there that day because she'd been studying your routine for months. The book, Architecture for Dummies, probably picked up an hour before you arrived. She played you from the very first moment, just like she played my mom. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Claire's mysterious past that she'd always been vague about. The way she'd seemed to know exactly what to say to win me over during our courtship. Her uncanny ability to anticipate my needs and desires. Even our meeting location. I've been stopping at Murphy's every Tuesday morning for 2 years before I met her. Of course, she would have known. Why? I managed to ask, though my throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. What does she want? Money, initially, but I think it's become something more twisted than that. She gets off on the control, the manipulation. She destroyed my mother's life just to prove she could, and now she's done the same thing to you. Tyler crushed his cigarette under his heel with more force than necessary. There's something else, Danny. Something I didn't want to tell you, but you need to know. She's not done with you yet. This was never meant to be permanent. What do you mean? 3 weeks ago, I was at a bar downtown with some friends from college. I saw her there with a man I didn't recognize. Definitely not you. They were close. Very close. When she went to the bathroom, I followed her, and I heard her on the phone. She was talking about timelines, about how much longer she needed to maintain the charade. She said something about a final payday, and then she could disappear forever. I stared at the ducks on the pond, watching them glide across the surface with deceptive calm, while their feet paddled frantically beneath the water. It seemed like an apt metaphor for my life. How long have you known? I recognized her the moment I saw her at your wedding. I tried to convince myself I was wrong, that it was just someone who looked similar. But there was no mistaking those eyes, that smile. I should have said something then, but I didn't know how to prove it, and honestly, you looked so happy. I thought maybe... He shrugged helplessly. I thought maybe she'd actually changed, that she genuinely cared about you. I was wrong. The rage was building slowly in my chest, a familiar burn that I'd learned to recognize over the years. It was the same feeling I'd had when I discovered Beth's affair, when I'd realized that my business partner had been embezzling from our firm, when my father had died and left everything to his secretary instead of his son. The difference was that those betrayals had caught me off guard, left me reeling and reactive. This time will be different. I need proof, I said quietly. Everything you can give me about Claire Dutton, about what she did to your mother, about the man she was with at the bar. I need phone numbers, addresses, photographs, anything that can verify what you're telling me. Tyler nodded eagerly. I kept everything from Mom's divorce. She made me promise to hold on to all the evidence in case Claire ever surfaced again. I have recordings, text messages, even some surveillance footage that Mom's private investigator collected. It's all in a safety deposit box downtown. Good. We'll start there. I stood up, my mind already racing through possibilities. But Tyler, I need you to understand something. Once we go down this road, there's no coming back. What I'm planning to do to Claire and whoever she's working with won't be pretty, and it won't be legal. If you're not prepared for that, you need to walk away now. He met my gaze steadily, and for a moment I saw flashes of the man he was becoming rather than the boy he'd been. She destroyed my family, Danny. She turned my mother into a broken woman who spent 3 years in therapy just to function again. Whatever you're planning, I want in. That night, I sat in my study with a glass of bourbon and Claire's laptop, which I'd carefully extracted from her purse while she was in the shower. My hands were steady as I connected the USB drive that contained Tyler's evidence to the computer, uploading everything to a secure cloud server I maintained for sensitive architectural projects. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using tools from my professional life to investigate my personal betrayal. Claire had been surprisingly careless with her digital security, probably assuming that her loving husband would never think to spy on her. Her email accounts were saved with passwords, her browsing history intact, her photo gallery unencrypted. What I found there made my earlier conversation with Tyler seem like a gentle warning rather than the full scope of her deception. There were dozens of photos of me taken without my knowledge, at work, at the gym, having lunch with clients. Surveillance photos that dated back almost 4 years, proving that Tyler was right about the length of her planning. There were detailed notes about my routines, my preferences, my financial situation, even my sexual habits from my marriage to Beth. Someone had done their homework. But the real revelation came in her email correspondence with someone identified only as M. The messages were coded, but not particularly cleverly, and reading through months of their exchanges painted a picture that made my blood run cold. Claire wasn't working alone. This was part of a larger operation that had targeted multiple divorced men with substantial assets. I was just the latest mark in what appeared to be a sophisticated long-term con. The most recent emails were particularly illuminating. Subject: almost ready for final phase. Estimated extraction date: 3 weeks from initiation. New target identified and preliminarily vetted. Suggests standard insertion protocol. Confirmed. Liquidation parameters remain unchanged. Dispose of all physical evidence per usual protocol. Expect bonus compensation upon completion. I read those exchanges 3 times before the full implication sank in. Claire wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to kill me. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and went for a run through her neighborhood, taking a deliberately circuitous route that allowed me to spot the surveillance team Claire's partner had stationed near her house. They were good, a different car each day, alternating between a cable repair van and what looked like a landscaping truck, but not good enough to fool someone who'd spent the last 15 years designing security systems for high-end commercial buildings. Claire was still asleep when I returned, her face peaceful in the early morning light filtering through our bedroom curtains. Looking at her now, knowing what I knew, was like seeing a completely different person. The soft curve of her smile seemed predatory. The way her hand reached for me, even in sleep, felt calculating rather than affectionate. How'd I been so blind? I made coffee and pretended to read the newspaper while she went through her morning routine, the same ritual she performed every day for 3 years. Shower for exactly 12 minutes, hair dried and styled in precise sections, makeup applied with the methodical precision of someone preparing for a performance. Because that's what her entire life with me had been, a performance. "You seemed distracted last night," she said as she joined me in the kitchen, already dressed in one of her perfectly tailored business suits. Claire worked as a marketing consultant for high-end real estate developments, a job that required extensive travel and provided excellent cover for whatever other activities she was involved in. Just thinking about the Morrison project, I lied smoothly. "The client is being difficult about the timeline." She nodded sympathetically, but I caught the way her eyes flickered to my laptop, which I deliberately left open on the counter. I'd spent an hour that morning creating fake email exchanges about fictional architectural problems, knowing she'd check my computer the moment I left for work. "I might be late tonight," she continued, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd prepared. "Meeting with a potential client in the city. Could run past midnight." "No problem. I've got plans with Randy anyway." Randy Martinez was my business partner and one of the few people I trusted implicitly. He'd been instrumental in helping me rebuild after the disaster with Beth, and I knew I could count on his discretion for what I was planning. Claire kissed me goodbye with the same passion she'd shown every morning for 3 years, and I forced myself to respond naturally, even though her touch now made my skin crawl. After her car disappeared around the corner, I waited exactly 10 minutes before making my first call. "Randy, it's Danny. Clear your schedule for the next 2 weeks. I need your help with something big." An hour later, I was sitting in Randy's office above our architectural firm, watching him review the evidence Tyler had provided. Randy had always been the more cautious of our partnership, the one who insisted on background checks for all our employees and clients. He'd expressed concerns about Claire from the beginning, though he'd never voiced them directly until now. "Jesus Christ, Danny," he muttered, scrolling through Claire's email exchanges. "How long has this been going on?" "Best guess? They've been planning this for almost 4 years. The woman I married doesn't exist." Claire Dutton disappeared from public records right around the time Claire Hoffman appeared in mine. Randy leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his graying hair. "Okay, so what's the play? We go to the police, turn over the evidence, let them handle it." I'd been expecting this suggestion, and I'd already decided against it. These people are professionals, Randy. By the time the police finish their investigation and build a case, I'll be dead and Claire will be halfway around the world with my life insurance payout. Besides, I'm not interested in justice. I want revenge. Danny, Randy's voice carried a warning tone that I'd heard many times over the years. He knew me well enough to recognize when I'd made a decision that couldn't be changed. She destroyed my first marriage, Randy. She's stolen 3 years of my life, and now she's planning to kill me. The legal system isn't equipped to handle someone like Claire Dutton. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Portland. But I am. The next week passed in a carefully choreographed dance of deception. During the day, I maintained my normal routine while using every spare moment to investigate Claire's network. Tyler had been invaluable in this process. His mother's private investigator had been thorough, and the evidence he'd collected provided dozens of leads to follow. Claire's partner, M, turned out to be Marcus Wright, a career criminal with a history of elaborate con jobs targeting wealthy divorcees. His real name was Michael Duvall, and he'd served time in 3 different states for fraud, identity theft, and assault. What the public records didn't show was his connection to at least 6 suspicious deaths over the past decade, all wealthy men who died in apparent accidents shortly after marrying women who then disappeared with substantial payouts. But Marcus wasn't working alone either. The operation involved at least 4 other people: a private investigator who specialized in background research on potential targets, a forger who created the false identities the women used, a financial expert who handled the money laundering, and what appeared to be a freelance killer who ensured that problematic targets didn't survive long enough to expose the scheme. I spent hours studying surveillance footage from the bar where Tyler had seen Claire with her mystery man, eventually identifying him as David Kim, a former Special Forces operator who'd been dishonorably discharged for excessive violence during overseas deployments. His service record, which Randy helped me access through contacts in the Veterans Administration, painted a picture of a man perfectly suited for the role of professional killer. The more I learned about the scope of their operation, the more impressed I became with their planning. They'd chosen their targets carefully: divorced men with substantial assets but limited family connections, people who wouldn't be immediately missed if they died suddenly. They'd established multiple fallback identities, offshore accounts, and escape routes. They'd even arranged for Claire to have an ironclad alibi for the night they planned to kill me. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. On Thursday night, Claire announced that her business trip had been extended another day. She'd be staying overnight in Seattle, meeting with clients through Friday afternoon. I expressed appropriate disappointment, while mentally noting that this fit perfectly with the timeline I'd observed in her emails. According to their plan, I would die Friday night in what would appear to be a home invasion gone wrong. That gave me exactly 24 hours to complete my preparations. I started by visiting a storage unit I'd rented under a false name in a neighboring city. Over the past week, I'd been gradually moving items there: camping equipment, tools, supplies that would be needed for what came next. I'd also made several cash purchases from different hardware stores, ensuring that no single transaction would appear suspicious if anyone bothered to investigate later. Friday morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day conducting final surveillance of each member of Claire's team. Marcus was staying at a hotel downtown under his right identity. David Kim had rented a house in the suburbs that was clearly being used as a base of operations. The private investigator, Helen Torres, worked out of a legitimate-seeming office but lived alone in an apartment that would be easy to access. By evening, I was ready. I'd always prided myself on being a careful planner. In architecture, attention to detail could mean the difference between a building that stood for decades and one that collapsed in the first strong wind. The same principles applied to what I was about to do. Success would depend on precise timing, thorough preparation, and the ability to adapt when circumstances inevitably changed. Claire called at 8 o'clock, right on schedule. "Hi, honey. Just wanted to check in. The meetings are running later than expected, so I probably won't be home until tomorrow afternoon." "No worries," I replied, injecting just the right amount of disappointment in my voice. "I'll probably just order pizza and catch up on some reading." "Sound perfect. I love you." "Love you too." The lie came easily now. At 9:30, I received a text from Tyler. Package delivered. Ready when you are. I smiled for the first time in a week. Tyler had proven remarkably resourceful over the past few days, using his connections from college to acquire items that couldn't be purchased through normal channels. His hatred for Claire Dutton ran almost as deep as mine, and he'd embraced his role in her destruction with enthusiasm that would have worried me under different circumstances. At 10 o'clock exactly, I made my move. The beauty of a well-executed plan is that it unfolds with the inevitability of a controlled demolition. Each element serves a specific purpose, and when properly coordinated, the result is both devastating and precise. I'd spent years watching buildings come down, studying the way strategic placement of explosives could bring down massive structures with surgical accuracy. The same principles applied to destroying lives. David Kim was my first target, primarily because he represented the most immediate physical threat. I've been watching his rented house for 3 days, learning his patterns, identifying his vulnerabilities. Former special forces or not, he'd grown complacent during his years as a civilian contractor. He kept regular hours, didn't vary his routes, and had developed a fondness for expensive whiskey that I intended to exploit. I entered his house through the basement window at 10:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes after he'd settled into his nightly routine of drinking alone while watching cable news. The sedative Tyler had acquired worked exactly as promised. Tasteless, odorless, and potent enough to incapacitate a man Kim's size within minutes of ingestion. He never saw me coming. When he woke up 6 hours later, he was zip-tied to a chair in the basement of an abandoned warehouse outside the city. I'd chosen the location carefully, remote enough to ensure privacy, but close enough to several other sites I'd need to visit before dawn. "Who the fuck are you?" His words were slurred from the lingering effects of the drugs, but his eyes were alert and calculating. Even restrained, he radiated the kind of controlled violence that came from years of professional killing. "I'm Daniel Morrison," I said simply, "though I suppose you know me as your next victim." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something that might have been respect. "You figured out. Eventually. The question now is whether you're going to tell me everything I want to know about your operation, or whether we're going to do this the hard way." He laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. "You think you're the first Mark who's gotten wise to us? 3 years ago, a guy in Denver figured out what was happening. Know what happened to him? I assume you killed him. Slowly. Very slowly. And when we're done with you, we're going to do the same thing to that kid who's been helping you. Tyler, right? Claire's been watching him since your little park meeting." The rage that had been simmering in my chest for a week finally boiled over. I prepared for this moment, known that it would come, but hearing him threaten Tyler still caught me off guard. The kid had risked everything to warn me, and now he was in danger because of it. I picked up the first tool from the array I'd laid out on a nearby workbench, a pair of industrial wire cutters that I'd originally purchased for a construction project. "Let's start with your fingers and work our way up. For every piece of information you give me, you keep a digit. Refuse to answer, and you lose one. Simple math." What followed was 47 minutes of the most brutal interrogation I'd ever witnessed, let alone conducted. I'd always known I was capable of violence when pushed far enough, but I'd never understood the depth of my own capacity for cruelty until that night. Kim was a professional killer, trained to withstand torture, but he was also a man with a healthy appreciation for self-preservation. By the time the sun started to rise, I had everything I needed: the location of their primary base of operations, the identities of all 6 team members, the timeline for their planned escape after my death, and most importantly, the location where they were holding their contingency funds, over $3 million in cash and negotiable securities stolen from previous victims. Kim himself was no longer a concern. I'd been careful to ensure that his death would send the right message to his surviving partners while providing no useful evidence to any potential investigators. The warehouse had security cameras, but they'd been recording to a digital system that would mysteriously malfunction during a power surge scheduled to occur 30 minutes after I left. Marcus Wright was my second target, and he proved considerably easier to handle than Kim. I found him in his hotel room at dawn, already packing for what was clearly an emergency departure. Someone had warned him that something was wrong, but not quickly enough for him to escape. Unlike Kim, Marcus broke almost immediately. He was a con artist, not a killer, and the sight of David Kim's severed finger, which I'd brought as a visual aid, convinced him that cooperation was his only chance of survival. It was supposed to be simple, he babbled as I secured his hands with the same zip ties I'd used on Kim. Find wealthy divorce guys, send in one of our girls, wait for the right moment, then liquidate the target and move on. Clean, efficient, profitable. How many? I asked. What? How many men have you killed? Personally? None. That was always Kim's job. But the operation? Maybe 30, 40 guys over the past 8 years. We were good at it, Danny. Really good. 40 men. 40 husbands, fathers, sons who'd been murdered for nothing more than their bank account balances. I thought about their families, the wives and children who'd been left to grieve losses they'd never understand, and my resolve hardened even further. Where's Claire? Safe house in the mountains. About 2 hours north of here. She's supposed to stay put until Kim confirms that you're dead. Then we all meet up and head for Mexico. And Helen Torres? Marcus's face went pale. How do you know about Helen? I know about all of you, Marcus. The question is whether you're going to help me find her or whether you're going to follow Kim's example. It took another hour to extract the remaining information I needed, but by 8 o'clock that morning, I had complete details about their operation, including bank account numbers, safe house locations, and the identities of their next 3 potential targets. Marcus had kept meticulous records, partly out of professional habit and partly as insurance against his partners. Helen Torres was at her apartment, apparently unaware that anything had gone wrong. I found her watering plants on her balcony, a picture of domestic normalcy that belied her role in multiple murders. She was a small woman in her 50s, the kind of person who would blend seamlessly into any crowd, which made her perfect for surveillance work. She tried to run when she saw me, but there was nowhere to go. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, and I'd already blocked the only exit. "You're Daniel Morrison," she said, backing toward the sliding door to her balcony. "You're supposed to be dead. Disappointing, I'm sure. Where are the files on your other targets?" "I don't know what you're talking about." I sighed and pulled out my phone, showing her a photo I'd taken earlier. Marcus right hung from construction crane at the warehouse, his body positioned to be visible from the interstate that ran past the industrial district. "Your partner, Marcus, was more cooperative. I'd prefer not to have to get creative with you as well." She broke faster than either of her colleagues, leading me to a hidden safe that contained detailed dossiers on dozens of potential victims. The scope of their operation was even larger than I'd imagined. They'd been researching targets across the entire Pacific Northwest, building profiles that went back months or even years. I spent an hour photographing everything, ensuring that I had complete documentation of their crimes. Then I made Helen call Claire's phone and deliver a coded message that would bring my wife home early. By noon, I was in position at our house, waiting for Claire to arrive. I'd arranged the scene carefully, her laptop open on the kitchen counter, displaying the evidence I'd collected about her real identity. Marcus's phone, which would show their text message exchanges. Photos of her surveillance targets spread across our dining room table. I wanted her to understand exactly how thoroughly her world had collapsed before we had our final conversation. She walked through the front door at 1:23 p.m., calling out my name with that same affectionate tone she'd used for 3 years. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor of our entryway, heard her set down her purse and keys in their usual spot, heard her humming the melody of a song that had been playing on the radio during our first date. The humming stopped when she reached the kitchen. "Hello, Claire," I said from my position in the doorway. "Or should I call you Claire Dutton?" She froze, her eyes taking in the evidence spread across our home. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the real person underneath, cold, calculating, utterly without remorse. Then her training kicked in, and she gave me the same loving smile that had charmed me for 3 years. "Danny, I can explain everything. Whatever you think you know, there's more to the story." "I'm sure there is. Start with why you killed my first marriage." Her smile never wavered. "Because I was paid to. Because you were researched for something bigger. Because I'm very good at my job. The casual way she admitted to destroying my life was almost more shocking than the admission itself. There was no guilt, no regret, just professional pride in a job well done. And now you're planning to kill me. Was planning. Past tense. Obviously, that's no longer an option. She moved closer, and I realized she was positioning herself within reach of the knife block on our kitchen counter. The question now is what happens next? What happens next is that you disappear forever. Just like David Kim disappeared. Just like Marcus Wright disappeared. Just like Helen Torres is about to disappear. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across her features. You killed them. I killed them. All three of them. And now I'm going to kill you. She lunged for the knives, faster than I'd expected, but not fast enough. I'd been anticipating this moment for days, and the taser Tyler had acquired stopped her cold. She collapsed to our kitchen floor, convulsing as 50,000 volts coursed through her nervous system. When the spasm stopped, I secured her to one of our dining room chairs with the same zip ties I'd used on her partners. She was conscious but disoriented, her perfect hair disheveled for the first time since I'd known her. The difference between you and me, I said as I began assembling the equipment I'd need for what came next, is that I never claimed to be a good person. You've spent 3 years pretending to love me, pretending to build a life with me, pretending to be someone you're not. I've always known exactly what I am. And what's that? Her voice was steadier than I'd expected. I'm a man who doesn't forgive. I'm a man who doesn't forget. And I'm a man who always finishes what he starts. What happened over the next 6 hours broke every law I'd ever sworn to uphold and violated every moral principle I'd been raised to respect. But by the time the sun set on that Friday evening, Claire Dutton had told me everything about her childhood in foster care, about her recruitment into Marcus's operation, about the dozens of men they'd killed, about the millions of dollars they'd stolen, about the new identities they'd created for their escape. More importantly, she told me about the offshore accounts where their stolen money was hidden, and she provided the access codes that would allow me to transfer every penny to accounts I'd established for the families of their victims. Claire died just after midnight. Her last words a promise that others would come looking for me, that her death would only bring more violence into my life. I was counting on it. I spent Sunday disposing of the evidence and creating an ironclad alibi for the weekend. Claire had supposedly been killed during a home invasion that occurred while I was attending a conference in San Francisco, an event I'd actually attended, making sure to be seen by dozens of witnesses who could confirm my presence there. Her body was found Monday morning by our housekeeper, who immediately called the police. I returned from my conference to find my house surrounded by squad cars and crime scene tape, playing the role of the devastated husband with the skill of a professional actor. The investigation that followed was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Claire's killer had worn gloves, left no fingerprints, taken nothing of obvious value. The murder appeared to be random, motiveless, the kind of tragedy that could happen to anyone. The police interviewed me extensively, but found no reason to suspect that the grieving widower might have been responsible for his wife's death. 3 weeks later, Tyler and I met again at Riverside Park, sitting on the same bench where he'd first warned me about Claire. He looked different now. Older, more serious, as if our shared experience had aged him beyond his years. The money transfers went through, he told me. 43 families received compensation for their losses. Anonymous donations, completely untraceable. Good. I watched the same ducks gliding across the pond, marveling at how peaceful they looked despite everything that had happened since our last conversation. And the files, delivered to the FBI field office in Seattle, along with enough evidence to connect Claire's operation to unsolved murders in 6 different states. They'll never be able to prosecute anyone, but at least the families will finally have answers. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. 2 men who'd shared something that couldn't be discussed with anyone else. Tyler had proven invaluable during the cleanup phase, using his computer skills to ensure that all traces of our investigation had been eliminated. More importantly, he'd shown a capacity for ruthless pragmatism that would serve him well in whatever came next. "Do you regret it?" he asked finally. I considered the question carefully. For people were dead because of decisions I'd made and actions I'd taken. I crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, done things that would have horrified the man I'd been just 2 weeks earlier. But when I thought about the families who would finally have closure, about the future victims who would be spared Claire's attention, about the justice that would never have come through legal channels, I found that my conscience was surprisingly clear. No, I said, I don't regret any of it. 6 months later, I sold my architectural firm and left Portland permanently. The insurance payout from Claire's death had been substantial, and combined with the money I'd recovered from offshore accounts, I had more than enough to start over anywhere I chose. I settled in a small town in Montana, bought a cabin near a lake, and began building a new life under a carefully constructed identity that would stand up to any reasonable scrutiny. I was done with marriage, done with trusting people who might not be what they seemed, done with being anyone's victim. But I wasn't done with being someone that predators should fear. The skills I developed during my investigation of Claire's operation had proven surprisingly transferable. Within a year, I'd established a reputation in certain circles as someone who could solve problems that were beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. Someone who could make dangerous people disappear permanently, quietly, and without leaving traces that would embarrass his clients. Tyler had been right about one thing. Others had come looking for me. Claire's operation hadn't existed in isolation. It was part of a larger network of criminals who preyed on vulnerable people for profit. When word spread that their carefully planned scheme had been exposed and their entire team eliminated, some of those criminals decided that I represented a threat that needed to be addressed. They were right, of course. I was a threat to anyone who made their living by destroying other people's lives. And over the past 5 years, I made sure that threat was taken very seriously indeed. I never remarried. I never trusted anyone completely again. But I also never forgot the lesson that Claire Dutton had taught me. Sometimes the only way to deal with monsters is to become something even more dangerous than they are. And I had become very dangerous indeed. The lake outside my cabin was perfectly still this morning, reflecting the mountains like a mirror. I sat on my deck with a cup of coffee and yesterday's newspaper, reading about the mysterious disappearance of a con artist who'd been targeting elderly widows in Denver. The police had no leads, no suspects, no idea what had happened to him. I smiled and turned to the sports page. It was going to be a beautiful day. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.